To be joined by the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt. Jeremy, I'm going to talk to you in a moment about, the core of your brief, particularly that very interesting mental health report that came out last week. But if I could just start by talking with you about the stories that are all over the papers about abusive behaviour by MPs, by ministers. What is Theresa May going to do about all this?
Well, she's said today that she's going to write to the Speaker because it's a cross-party issue and we need to come up with an approach to solve this completely. And I think people at home will be quite angry about this because a bit like the Harvey Weinstein stuff, Parliament, like Hollywood, is very good at preaching to people what they ought to be doing and how they ought to be behaving. But I'm afraid this shows that in our own backyard, we don't live up to the high standards that we would expect others to. And
just to be clear, you think this is an issue for Parliament, not the individual parties?
Well, we are going to be, or the Cabinet Office is going to be doing a review of whether Mark Garnier has breached the ministerial code in that specific incident.
And that was the request to his assistant to go into this sex shop and buy a couple of sex toys. That might be in breach of the code itself.
Potentially, and as the facts of that particular case are in dispute, so the Cabinet Office are going to look at it and decide whether they think there was a breach. But I think there is a broader issue, as we've seen, because it does span all parties. And, my view is that, if you had a daughter who got a job in Westminster, perhaps her first job leaving university, as a mum or a dad, you would want to be confident that she's not going to be subjected to this kind of pressure or this kind of behaviour. And I also think, without being too pious, but we should be aspiring to set some kind of an example as MPs. So, we need to sort this out.
There are reports of 3 senior ministers having behaved in a wholly inappropriate way. Do you know anything about that?
I don't. And I must admit, I haven't seen anything. Why would I particularly have seen it? But there are going to be all sorts of rumours and speculations.
You didn't join Parliament itself, I think, till 2005, but you'll be aware that John Major's period in office was completely dogged by just relentless investigations by newspapers into the sexual behaviour of ministers. Do you think Theresa May would be advised to basically nip all of this in the bud, find out everything as quickly as possible, and get rid of anybody who she thinks has, if a minister has crossed a line, do you think that minister should be sacked?
Well, I think Diane Abbott got it right this morning when she said that things have got a lot better since those days when we had the late-night sittings and the bars. That was pretty much before my time. And so I think things have improved, no doubt about it. But I think there's more to do. And, clearly in this situation, it's right people come forward if they think they've been badly treated. We need to investigate. But we just need to establish the rules of the game so this sort of thing doesn't happen.
But just to press you on that, would you back if she felt that she had to sack somebody because of, reports of inappropriate behaviour, would you be behind the Prime Minister?
Well, if she made a judgment that that was the right thing to do, then, I would support her because I think she has very good judgment on this kind of thing and, in fact, a long track record of standing up for women's rights. But that must be her decision and she will take that on the basis of the facts of the case.
And then I do want to move on to mental health in just one second. Final question on this. The culture of the Whip's office is to gather information about MPs, which they normally use, to make sure that those MPs vote in the right way. Knowledge is power. But do you think in a world where some of the knowledge that they're gathering is about, for example, inappropriate sexual behaviour, actually there's got... the thing to do in those circumstances is when a whip knows about an MP crossing the line, Prime Minister should be informed and action should be taken in a public sense. Do you think that cloak and dagger behaviour has just got to end?
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint. I've never been a whip, but I've got lots of friends who are, and I always ask them, is it true that you've got a black book with all the terrible goings-on of MPs? And they always say no. I'm afraid I think the reality is a lot more vanilla than some of the stories.
I'm not sure you're completely right about that, because I think that, as somebody who's followed these things for years, I think there is... It may be called a black book, but I think they do know more about what goes on than they disclose. Now let's get on to this very important initiative that you're taking on the back of a report by Dennis Stevenson and Paul Farmer about how all institutions have to treat people with mental health problems much more sensitively. Now, you have, I think, on behalf of the Health Service, said that the Health Service will take up all their recommendations. What will that mean to workers in the health service in practice? What difference will health service workers see?
Well, we have actually been going at this now for 3 years, and we're starting to see some difference. We're spending £150 million in incentives this year, which we give to trusts who get an improvement in their staff survey results as to whether the staff in their trust actually think that they are taking positive action to improve.
So there's £150 million to monitor the mental health well-being of NHS employees.
No, it's not to monitor. It's money to actually support new schemes that help to make sure, for example, that staff have someone they can go to if they've got a mental health issue. I think there's a big challenge for the NHS. We are the country's largest
There's a huge amount of stress within the NHS.
We also have a very big responsibility in terms of delivering the mental health revolution that we are seeking to champion at the moment. But I think we also have particular pressures in the NHS at the moment, and I think for people working on the front line in the NHS, they're standing on their feet for a very long time. I don't think they've ever worked harder, and there are real pressures that we need to address.
Can I ask you a very fundamental question about resource? One of the aims of everything that the government is doing in this area is to remove the stigma that many people feel if they have a mental health problem. People find it very difficult to talk publicly about, having a mental health challenge. If, as a society, we become more tolerant, more open, more caring in this respect, will that increase the burden on the health service? Because many people say at the moment the problem is they simply can't get the help they need, the medical help they need from the health service.
Well, we are in the process of massively expanding provision in the NHS, probably the biggest expansion of mental health provision in Europe, and our objective is to be able to treat them
from a low base.
I think we probably already have objectively the highest standards of mental health provision of any major European country. That's certainly what some top NHS psychiatrists say, but we want to do a lot more, and we want to be treating around 1 million more people every year in 3 years' time. So there's a lot of work to do, but I think the point about stigma is this, that if people come forward early, it actually costs us less in the long run, because one of the things that's changing is that people are beginning to understand that for the vast majority of mental health issues, treatment can be effective. You can get some kind of a recovery, sometimes a complete recovery.
So treating somebody in crisis is obviously more expensive, would be your argument, and you've got to essentially help somebody before they get into a condition of total breakdown.
Absolutely, and where that argument is most acute is with young people, because half of mental health conditions become established before people are 14. So if we could
and the schools aren't doing enough, are they? And what are you doing to help schools identify young people with these vulnerabilities?
Well, we have this very big expansion plan, but even with this plan in place, Theresa May, who is absolutely passionate about mental health, and I have both taken the view that we're not doing enough when it comes to children and young people's mental health, and we need to do much more with schools. So we are looking at what we can do inside schools. We have a green paper that we'll be publishing shortly with our ideas as to what we could do. But essentially, we need to completely join up the way the education system and the health service think about these issues. Because in reality, the people who know children best are their families and their schools. They will know them far better than the NHS will. And we need to tap into that knowledge if we're going to have a proper understanding of the mental health challenges that an individual child faces.
And one of the, I think, huge issues is so few people in prominent positions feel confident about talking about problems they may themselves have experienced, because they worry that their own credibility would be undermined. I mean, do you think people, no idea whether you've ever, felt that you were on the brink of, a sort of serious mental health problem, but do you think in general ministers, leaders of parties, need to be more open about the challenge? Because we've all, listen, in my own case, let's be clear, after my wife died, it was a very, very difficult period. I was undoubtedly suffering for a period from post-traumatic stress. And don't you think people like us have a responsibility to be more open about problems we all face?
It is incredibly powerful when we are. And if you look at people like Alistair Campbell, who you got on your show, or people like Charles Walker on the Conservative side, who's spoken very openly, in my own case, as you asked me, I haven't been lucky enough so far not to have, but 1 in 4 of us will have a diagnosable mental health issue in our lifetimes, and 1 in 6 of us have one at any one time. So you never know what's around the corner, and I've had lots of close friends who have been through those issues.
Do you think your cabinet colleagues would feel comfortable talking about problems they've experienced?
It's very difficult in any profession where there is a premium on appearing strong, and that is why it's an exceptionally brave thing when people do speak out. But it's very important that we do, because if someone like Alistair Campbell or Charles Walker speaks out, that gives confidence to other people. And I think that one of the most important things about this review that Theresa May commissioned that came out this week, every year 300,000 people lose their jobs because of untreated mental health conditions.
And one of the things the report says is that if we treated those people in the way that we treat people with physical ailments, there'd be 100,000 fewer people losing their jobs, which is shocking, isn't it?
It's shocking, and also it's very bad for the economy, it's very bad for businesses. And I think sometimes, you know, some companies do this absolutely brilliantly, but I think in some cases the last bastion of stigma against mental health is actually the personnel departments of companies, that when they find out someone's got a mental health problem, essentially try to lose them, and that is what we've really got to stop.
There's a bit more I want to pick up with you about this, but Alistair, can I just ask you, as somebody who is a great campaigner, do you have sympathy with senior people who refuse to talk out about their own problems for fear of reputational damage?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, in fact, Nick Clegg's predecessor, Charles Kennedy, I used to talk to him a lot about his problem with alcohol. And he had genuine concerns that if he was open about his problems, that it would damage him with his constituents,
was he right?
with the media. It was his judgment, and I never say to people, you should be open. I always say, I have always been open, and I have never felt that was the wrong thing for me. But I think, I had a letter the other day from somebody who's a nurse who said that it's all very well for you. I'm a nurse. If I go for promotion, I genuinely worry that if I was open about, she said she was bipolar, that that would be held against her. And that's in the NHS.
And on this issue of resource, do you agree with Jeremy that in the long term, if we become a more tolerant, open, caring society when it comes to mental health, actually there'll be savings for the NHS?
Absolutely no doubt about that. And I thought the Farmer Stevenson report, which I really recommend people read, is full of really good stuff. My big worry is the one that you articulated, which is that as the campaign on the stigma side is won, more and more people, particularly young people, where there's something going on that I don't think any of us understand at the moment, there's a greater and greater demand for services, and with all the other pressures on the National Health Service, people are finding that those services simply aren't there. And the Quality Care Commission report last week on young people's care was pretty damning for where we are as a modern civilised society.
Much more to talk about after the break. Stay with us, because Jeremy Hunt will still be with me. Can't think why. Monday, I'm delighted to say Jeremy Hunt is still with us. The Health Secretary can't... Oh, no, that's not for me, that's for you. I'm trying to thread you, God knows.
There are lots of tweets out there picking up on a point that Alistair Campbell just made about resources. So first of all, we've got a former Shadow Health Minister, Luciana Berger. She's saying when people are coming forward early, there aren't the early intervention services to help. The system is geared towards crisis. But then a slightly different point from former footballer Stan Collymore. It's quite powerful, this. Last night in England, there were no psychiatric beds available for NHS patients. Not one anywhere. This is England in 2017. Disgrace. But just quickly on the subject of Twitter, the Health Secretary sounding very soft and gentle, but he can be quite fierce. Not for him lurking on Twitter and suffering in silence. Instead, he gets stuck in. Just take a look at these. So this was tweeted, I think, in the last week. Joanne, or Jomo, she has 21 followers. Not very many. But she said, she's a nurse, and she said, I would love for you, Jeremy Hunt, to come and work a 13-hour shift with me. If you think we're well-staffed, you are delusional. That did not go unnoticed, because the Health Secretary tweeted back to her, if I thought we had enough nurses, I wouldn't have announced a 25% increase in training places. Even so, 11,000 more than 4 years ago. But then there's another one here. This chap tweeted, the NHS was founded by a brave generation who are now being betrayed, Jeremy Hunt. And again, he's looking at, you've obviously seen this before. Was it the 6,500 additional doctors or 11,000 additional nurses during my time that particularly upset you? Do you write these yourself?
I do, yes. Can't you tell?
I can't.
No, they have got your... So you don't, but you're a rare minister who doesn't get a SPAD to do these things, an advisor.
I think you know if someone else has done a tweet for you. And, I mean, look, I have mixed feelings, to be honest, because there is a lot of... frankly, very unpleasant stuff on Twitter and Facebook, which isn't much fun to read. But the trouble is that for so many people, this is how they get their news, this is how they communicate. I had so many people who said to me that they voted for Jeremy Corbyn in the last election because they heard nothing for the Conservatives for the whole election campaign. And that we were pumping out stuff on the national media, pumping out leaflets, but they were getting their news from Facebook and Twitter, so I think you have to be on it.
And are many of your colleagues following your example of actually doing it themselves?
I think some do, some don't. I mean, it is a time commitment, and it just depends on whether you see part of your responsibility as to communicate with people about what you're doing, or just to do the policy stuff. No, you probably do. I mean, you don't have to tweet him back. You can respond to Stan Collymore, you know, ex-footballer. And now, is he right that there wasn't a single psychiatric bed available? Well, I don't know the situation last night or where he got his numbers from. I do know that we have a problem with enough psychiatric beds, which we are addressing. We actually now have increased the number of psychiatric beds. It's particularly important to do so for young people and child patients, because we don't want them to be far away from home. But there is something that is going on here. There is a change in the way we treat people. We're trying to treat many more people in the community as opposed to in the old asylums that thankfully have now all been closed down. So there is an underlying reduction in the number of beds because we are getting better at treating people nearer home. But that is the reason why, you know, Alistair Campbell mentioned the CQC report on children and young people's mental health.
Which was deeply worrying.
Which was deeply worrying. We commissioned that report because we said it's not good enough. Even with all the expansion plans in mental health that are being planned, we need to do better on the children's bit of it. So we asked the CQC to give us the honest, unvarnished truth, which they duly did, and we're going to do something about it.
Can I just ask, you know, when it comes to organisations, whether it's in the public sector or indeed the private sector, shouldn't there be more stick to make sure that they treat people with mental health conditions better? What I'm thinking of, for example, is the Health and Safety Executive has the ability to impose big sanctions against companies that put the physical health of their employees at risk. Shouldn't the Health and Safety Executive, you know, if they come across a company or an institution with a culture of bullying, shouldn't the HSE have the ability to really take action in those cases?
Well, it's quite an interesting question. They may already have the power to do that.
Well, they hardly ever do it, though, let's be clear.
But I think, you know, part of this, yes, of course you need sticks, and all employers need to behave responsibly, but part of it is also just changing attitudes. And I think for a lot of employers, I mean, I used to run my own business, so we didn't have a huge number of employees, but, you know, I remember we did have once an employee who had mental health problems, and we didn't understand it, and it was a scary thing for us as an employer, and a lot of people don't understand that this is a disease, an illness that can be fixed like physical health conditions, and that's the massive change that Alistair's talking about in people's consciousness about these things, that you can do something about it. And
now, I'd quite like to move us on. We've not got much time left. We always ask our viewers for questions to our guests, and Harish Hirani on Twitter says, as a born-again Leave supporter, you recently said that if there was, unlike the Prime Minister, you've said how you would vote if there was a referendum today on staying or leaving the EU. He says, how do you reconcile your new position with the sheer numbers of EU citizens who work in the NHS but are now leaving the country because of disillusionment?
Well, they aren't, actually. I mean, what we have seen a tailing off...
Numbers have risen, though, of people leaving.
We've seen a tailing off of the number of people applying to work in the NHS from the EU as a result of the uncertainty around Brexit. I think the EU staff in the NHS do a fantastic job. 21,000 nurses, 10,000 doctors. I want them to stay. Would you
urge Amber Rudd and the Prime Minister to come up with a new immigration rules that makes it just as easy for EU citizens to work in the NHS as it's ever been?
Well, when we have control of our borders and our own immigration policy, I'm absolutely certain that we will have an immigration policy that means that the NHS and social care system are able to get the number of people they need from not just from the EU but from all over the world, because countries that do have their own immigration policies... So you want
the immigration system to prioritise the needs of the NHS?
Well, all countries that have control of their own immigration policies do prioritise the needs of their health and social care systems, and I'm sure we will do the same. And you're absolutely confident
that you will do the same. Well, look, very good to see you this morning. That's sadly all we have time for. I thought